Everyone knows how clever and loyal pets can be. They recognize those who treat them with care. But what about wild animals? Can even dangerous predators appreciate kindness? This is the remarkable story of an elderly man named Thomas, who lived near the lush forests of the Appalachian Mountains. Having spent much of his life in these mountains, Thomas was very familiar with the area. One crisp autumn morning, while walking along a favorite trail, he stumbled upon an unexpected sight. There, near a fallen tree, lay a young bobcat. It barely moved and looked weak, its hind leg caught in a rusty trap likely left by an old hunter. The bobcat was thin, its fur dirty and matted, and it showed no signs of fleeing as Thomas drew closer. Its eyes, usually fierce, were dull from exhaustion and pain, and there were no signs of its mother or other bobcats around. Understanding that this animal had been trapped for some time and was close to starvation, Thomas felt a strong urge to help, despite the risks involved with approaching a wild predator. He approached slowly, speaking softly to avoid frightening it. The bobcat watched him, seemingly aware that he meant no harm, and allowed Thomas to gently free its leg from the trap. Upon closer inspection, Thomas noted that the limb was broken and infected. He realized that without proper treatment, the animal wouldn't survive. Using pieces of his shirt, he made a makeshift splint and bandaged the wound as best he could. The trip back to his cabin took a while, as Thomas carried the surprisingly light bobcat, weakened from its ordeal. Instead of resisting, the animal remained calm, perhaps sensing that Thomas was there to help. Once home, he settled the bobcat into a cozy corner of his workshop, providing food and water. Over the next few days, Thomas cared for the bobcat, whom he affectionately named Whiskers because of its distinct facial features. Initially, Whiskers was cautious, with its wild instincts keeping it alert. Yet as days turned into weeks, a bond began to grow. Thomas would talk to him while working on wood carvings, and Whiskers would watch closely, following the movements of the tools and the shaping of the wood. Whiskers, the bobcat, began to eat regularly, gradually regaining his strength and vitality. His fur became shinier, and the wild sparkle returned to his eyes. Thomas's grandson, Ethan, visited from time to time, bringing the enthusiastic energy of a 10-year-old boy. Ethan was fascinated by Whiskers, but understood the importance of keeping a respectful distance, aware of the line between a domesticated pet and a wild animal. To everyone's surprise, Whiskers showed no signs of aggression towards Ethan. Instead, he watched the boy with curiosity, perhaps sensing the connection he shared with Thomas. As the weeks went by, Whiskers' leg healed remarkably well. Eventually, Thomas knew it was to release the bobcat back into the wild. This moment was bittersweet. Early one morning, Thomas opened the door to his workshop, giving Whiskers the choice to leave. The bobcat stepped outside, hesitated for a moment to look back at Thomas, and then disappeared into the forest. Thomas stood there for a while, experiencing a blend of sadness and fulfillment. He had done his best to save the creature, and now it was heading back to its natural habitat. Life returned to its normal routine. Thomas continued his daily walks and woodworking while cherishing the visits from Ethan. However, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. He missed the silent companionship of Whiskers and the understanding they had developed without needing words. He often wondered how the bobcat was faring in the wild and if it remembered their time together at the cabin. One weekend, Ethan came to stay with his grandfather. Eager to explore the forest, he begged Thomas to let him go on a short hike by himself. Thomas agreed, but cautioned him to stick to the well-trodden paths and not wander too far. Ethan promised and set off, excited to discover interesting rocks or plants to share with Thomas. As the sun began to set, Thomas realized that Ethan hadn't returned. What began as concern quickly turned into worry as darkness fell. Grabbing a flashlight and his walking stick, he ventured out to search for his grandson. Calling Ethan's name echoed back at him, met only by the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures awakening. Anxiety tightened its grip on him. The forest he knew so well suddenly felt vast and unforgiving. Thoughts raced through his mind, imagining all sorts of dangers, a misstep near a ravine, a tumble over rocks, or encounters with wild animals. As Thomas hurried along the paths, a sense of urgency filled him. He was searching for Ethan, who seemed to be in trouble. Just when worry began to set in, he heard a rustling sound nearby. Turning in that direction, he was surprised to see a familiar shape emerge from the shadows. It was Whiskers, the bobcat, standing a few yards away. For a moment they locked eyes, and Thomas felt a spark of hope. Could it be that Whiskers was there to assist him? Without hesitation, Whiskers turned and began to walk away. He glanced back at Thomas, as if encouraging him to follow. Trusting his instincts, Thomas trailed the bobcat deeper into the forest, onto a path he seldom used. The ground grew rougher, and the trees thickened, but Whiskers moved purposefully ahead. Thomas felt his heart race, not just from the physical exertion, but also from the anticipation of what lay ahead. After what felt like a long journey, Whiskers came to a stop near a cluster of large boulders. As Thomas approached, he heard a faint cry. It was Ethan's voice, weak but recognizable. The boy was stuck in a narrow crevice between the rocks, his ankle twisted, unable to climb out on his own. A wave of relief washed over Thomas as he helped Ethan back to safety. Though shaken, Ethan was mostly unharmed. "How did you find me?" Ethan asked, eyes wide with surprise. Thomas glanced around, but Whiskers had disappeared. "An old friend showed me the way," he replied softly as he supported Ethan. Together they made their way back home. The night was peaceful, and stars sparkled brightly above them. Thomas felt a connection to the forest, sensing a kindness he hadn't fully recognized before. Back at the cabin, Ethan rested, recounting his adventure. Thomas stepped outside and looked toward the forest, quietly saying, "Thank you," hoping Whiskers could hear him. There was no answer, yet a comforting peace enveloped him. Days turned into weeks, and life returned to normal. Ethan healed swiftly and approached the forest with more caution. He often asked about Whiskers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive bobcat. Thomas would smile and reassure him that Whiskers was out there somewhere, living his life. One morning, while sipping coffee on the porch, Thomas noticed something on the railing. It was a small, smooth stone, something he had never seen before. As Thomas moved around the cabin, he noticed a stone on the ground. It was one of the ones Ethan had gathered during his unfortunate hike. He picked it up and slipped it into his pocket, then gazed out toward the forest. Could it be that Whiskers, the bobcat, had left it there? The thought brought a comforting warmth to his heart. As the seasons changed, Thomas noticed that sightings of Whiskers became more frequent. Sometimes he would catch a quick look at the bobcat perched on a distant rock or moving stealthily among the trees. It felt like Whiskers was keeping an eye on both him and Ethan. Their bond, built on kindness and compassion, clearly remained strong. People in the nearby town started sharing stories about a peculiar bobcat that behaved differently from others. Livestock stayed untouched, and there were even accounts of lost hikers being guided back to safety. Listening to these narratives filled Thomas with quiet pride, knowing Whiskers was leaving an impression on the world. One particularly harsh winter brought a fierce storm that buried the region in snow. The roads became impassable, and supplies ran low, prompting Thomas to ration food. One night, as the wind howled outside, he heard a scratching sound at the door. When he opened it cautiously, there stood Whiskers, his fur dusted with snow. Surprised, Thomas stepped aside, welcoming the bobcat inside. Whiskers shook off the snow, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to understand. Over the next few days, they shared the warmth of the cabin. Thomas spoke freely, sharing stories and thoughts, while Whiskers listened in silence. Their companionship offered comfort during the isolating storm. When the weather cleared, Whiskers left as suddenly as he had come. Thomas watched the bobcat disappear into the melting snow, feeling a deep gratitude for the unexpected visit. It was clear their lives were interwoven in a way that went beyond the typical relationship between man and wildlife. Years passed, and Thomas grew older. His walks became shorter, and his movements slowed. Meanwhile, Ethan blossomed into a young man, often helping his grandfather and cherishing the stories of Whiskers. One summer, sensing his time was nearing its end, Thomas chose to take one final walk into the forest. As he strolled along the familiar paths, memories flooded back, finding Whiskers, caring for the injured bobcat, and saving Ethan. Eventually, he reached a clearing and sat on a fallen log to rest, feeling the vibrant life of the forest around him. As Thomas closed his eyes, the calming sounds of nature enveloped him, bringing an overwhelming sense of peace. A gentle rustling caught his attention, and he opened his eyes to see Whiskers, a bobcat, just a few feet away. Their gazes locked, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. They exchanged a silent farewell filled with mutual respect and appreciation for the journeys they had shared. Later that night, Thomas passed away, peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, friends and family gathered to honor his life. Ethan, his grandson, spoke fondly of Thomas's kindness, love for the forest, and the unique bond he had formed with Whiskers. As the service came to a close, attendees noticed a lone bobcat on a distant hill, observing from afar. Whispers spread among the crowd, yet no one felt the need to approach or disturb the creature. Whiskers remained a part of the forest's natural presence. Hikers often shared stories about a bobcat that seemed to guide lost souls back to familiar paths or appeared in times of need. Now a forest ranger, Ethan frequently sensed Whiskers' presence during his patrols. This brought him comfort, reminding him that his grandfather's legacy of kindness continued to thrive. The tale of Thomas and Whiskers became a beloved story in their Appalachian community, a testament to the idea that compassion can transcend boundaries. It illustrated how even the most untamed animals can acknowledge and reciprocate kindness, and showed that the gap between humans and nature is not as wide as it may seem. In the end, the question of whether wild animals, even those regarded as dangerous, can understand kindness was answered affirmatively. The remarkable bond between Thomas and Whiskers highlighted how profound connections can flourish when compassion fuels our actions.